Brachos Daf Yudalid continues the discussion of interrupting by speaking in the middle of Brachos Kriya Shema or Shema. The Gemara extends that to interrupting in the middle of listening to the Megillah or saying Hallel. The Gemara then discusses halachos of saying Shalom Aleichem to somebody, or doing your own private work, or traveling before Tefillah in the morning. The Gemara returns to the Mishnah and continues to discuss halachos of Shema, including when we stick on emes to the end of Shema, and you're allowed to be mafsik there, and the parsha of Tzitzis, Vayomer, should it be said at night or not? The Gemara discusses again the order of the parshas of Tefillin, which is referenced in the Mishnah, and the order of saying Shema before putting on Tefillin or after putting on Tefillin. All these discussions are in this blot. Also, along the way, the Gemara will take a detour and discuss tasting on a fast day and something about dreams. The Gemara begins by bringing a brisa which supports what it had said in the previous blot about what the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir was as to when you're allowed to interrupt in the brachos or parshas of Kriya Shema. The Gemara had understood the machlokes to be as follows. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir both agree that if you are holding in between prakim of Shema, you are allowed to greet someone whom you feel obligated to honor. And if you're holding in the middle of a parak of Shema, you're only allowed to greet someone who you are afraid of. The difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir is who are you allowed to respond to and when in the middle of Shema. According to Rabbi Meir, it had appeared that the halachos of responding are the same as the halachos of greeting. So the Gemara was bothered by that. Why would he say that you can do the same thing? And he says you can greet, and then he says and you can respond. So the Gemara now interprets that as meaning that you can greet, and it's obvious that you could respond. Responding is even easier halachically. The opinion of Rabbi Yehuda is that you can respond to somebody on one level lower fear. You can respond between prakim to anybody, and you can respond during the parak to somebody who you're obligated to honor. The Gemara now records that Eichi, who used to learn in the house of Rabbi Chia, once asked Rabbi Chia, what about interrupting in the middle of Hallel and Megillah? So the Gemara said, well, for sure, if you can interrupt in Shema, Rabbi Chia answered him, you can certainly interrupt in Hallel and Megillah, which is only Midrabanan. Well, that's one possibility. But the other possibility is perhaps Hallel and Megillah have Persume Nisa. They spread the nace, whichever one happened. Megillah is obviously referring to the nace of Purim, and Hallel is referring to each nace whenever it is. So perhaps you should not interrupt for that reason. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Chia's answer was that you're allowed to interrupt same halachas as Shema. There is no inyan of Persume Nisa to make it more difficult halachically to interrupt. Rabbah had a somewhat of a split halacha. He said it depends what kind of Hallel you're saying. If you're saying the whole Hallel, one of the 21 times throughout the year when we say the entire Hallel, so then you are allowed to interrupt between the prakim, but not in the middle of a parak. But if you're on a day where you're not saying the entire Hallel, you're skipping the two paragraphs that we skip in what we call half Hallel, so then, because it's less of an obligation to say Hallel, even in the middle of a parak, you're allowed to interrupt. The Gemara challenges this halacha by saying that Rav Bar Shiva went to the house of Ravina, and it was one of the days when you only say half Hallel, and it was in the middle of Ravina was in the middle of saying Hallel, and he did not interrupt to greet Rav Bar Shiva. So this is different. Rav Bar Shiva is not somebody that Ravina felt obligated to honor, and therefore he was considered to be a person that you would not interrupt for in the middle of Shema, and therefore he didn't interrupt in the middle of Hallel. The Gemara records another shaila that somebody asked from someone who was learning in his house. The Gemara says, Ashion used to learn in the house of Rav Ami. He asked Rav Ami, somebody who was in the middle of a fast, he was mekabel tainus upon himself. Is he allowed to taste food? Meaning fasting means he's not allowed to eat to the point that he feels satiated, but to take a bite, to taste from a pot of soup that he's cooking or something like that, to see if he needs more salt, that he's allowed to do, or he's not. So the Gemara says that Rav Ami answered him, and he said, no, on a fast day, the prohibition is enjoying your food. If you're just tasting the pot to see how it is, it's not a problem. That is the halacha, and the same thing applies that just tasting a pot is not enough for you to say a bracha on it. You only say a bracha if you're eating enough to have enough from it. Tasting, you wouldn't say a bracha on it. Bracha also is something that applies to hana, for pleasure from the food. The Gemara says, how much would you have to eat from the pot for it to be considered hana, as opposed to just tasting. Rav Ami Navasi said, a revius. The Gemara now has a kasha on this halacha of interrupting to greet somebody who you feel a need to honor. The Gemara says that Rav said the following thing: anybody who greets his friend, he says shalom to his friend before he is mispalel shmona esrei, it's considered like he made a mizbeach, a bama, which is a terrible thing to do now when it is forbidden. And the proof is that it says like this in Yeshayahu: Chidu lachem min ha'adam asher neshama ba'apai. Ignore these people that have their own soul. Ki bameh nechshavhu. He is not worth anything. The Gemara reread that as ki bama nechshavhu. He's like a foreign mizbeach. If you go greet him before you greet a Kadosh Baruch Hu, before you say Shemona Esrei, so it's like you're worshiping on a bama. It's almost like avodah zarah. The Gemara adds that Shmuel says you made him into a bama, and not Hashem. The Gemara then says that this being the case, how could we say that you're allowed to greet somebody in the middle of Shema? Shema is before Shemona Esrei. You're not allowed to greet him even if you're not interrupting anything. The Gemara says no. This isser of greeting somebody only applies for going to his house and greeting him. Going out of your way, the halacha is to greet him. But if you happen to meet somebody by happenstance, then it's okay to greet him. The halacha agav is that you're not supposed to say shalom even then. The Gemara now turns its attention to somebody who takes care of his own personal business before he davens. So the Gemara learns out of the pasuk which says as follows: Tzedek lefanav yahalich. Tzedek, the Gemara says, refers to tefillah. Lefanav yahalich should go first. V'yasem lederech pa'amav. Then you could go on the way and take care of your own personal business. You should not be first taking care of business and then going to daven. The Gemara has a possible girus over here which says that he's also considered like he made a bama, a private mizbeach, if he takes care of his business first. Then the Gemara says, and somebody who will go to daven first and then afterwards travels, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes care of his business for the day. And you read it as follows: Tzedek lefanav yahalech. If first comes prayer, v'yasim l'derech b'amav, then he, capital H, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will take care of everything that happens to you the rest of the day. Now the same Amandi Amar, Rav Yoina Amar, Rav Zera, says something about dreams. We're going to be learning two possible things out of the pasuk. V'soveya yolin bal yipaki. The Gemara first says, if somebody doesn't have a dream for 7 nights, he's called bad. He's called ra. Why? Because you read the pasuk as follows: V'sheva, you don't read it v'soveya. V'sheva, 7 nights, yolin, he will sleep. Bal yipakid, and if he doesn't have a dream, meaning he's not remembered from Shemayim with a dream, ra, so then he's bad. The other way to read this is that if somebody learns Torah and fills himself up with Torah before he goes to sleep, he won't have any bad dreams, he won't receive any bad news in his dreams. How do you read it then? V'soveya yolan, somebody goes to sleep when he's full, bal yipakid ra, will not be remembered with any negative news in his dreams. The Gemara now turns its attention to the next part of the Mishnah, where we had a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda, which parts of Shema are considered to be bein prakim. There was one specific spot that they argued about, which was between Hashem Elokeichem and Emes. The Chachamim said that's called bein prakim. It's the end of Shema and the beginning of the bracha of Emes v'yatziv. So between Elokeichem and Emes is called between the chapters. And Rabbi Yehuda said it's not. You can't interrupt over there. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan Rabbi Avo quoted Rabbi Yechanan, who says, what's the reason? Because it's a pasuk in Sefer Yirmiyahu that says, Hashem Elokim Emes. So we want to say a similar thing. We want to put Hashem Elokim together with Emes. Now the Gemara quotes a machlokes whether when you start saying Emes v'yatziv, do you just start from v'yatziv? Or do you repeat Emes? So Gemara says, machlokes, Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Yechanan says you repeat it, Rabbi says you do not repeat it. And the Gemara quotes an interesting incident where somebody heard Rabbah saying Shema, and Rabbah said Emes twice. So this person said, oh, Rabbah had an attack of saying Emes. Turns its attention to an interesting question. Why do we say the entire parsha of Tzitzis, which is Vayomer, the third of the parshas of Shema, why do we say that at night? At night there's no mitzvah of Tzitzis. We could skip it. The Gemara quotes opinions that said that we actually shouldn't say the whole thing. The Gemara says as follows. Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said a wonderful thing. The Gemara says, what's the wonderful thing? You don't say the whole thing. The parsha starts as follows: Vayedaber Shema Moshe Lemor, Daber al Bnei Yisrael v'yamartu aleihim. Says Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. There you stop and you jump to the end and you just say Ani Hashem Lekechem Emes. The Gemara says, what a second. Abaye says, hold a second. You're not allowed to do that. You don't have to start it because it's about tzitzis, which don't apply at night. But if you start it, we learned that if Kahana says you can't skip, you have to say the whole thing. So maybe you want to tell me the Gemara says no. If you stop there by v'amarta aleim, dabra b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta aleim, as long as you stop there, that's not called you started the parsha. You didn't say anything about tzitzis yet. You just said Hashem told Moshe, tell the Jews. Okay, so maybe that's not called you started, so then you're allowed to skip. So the Gemara quotes that Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says, no, once you said v'amarta aleim, it's called you started. So if you started, you got to finish. So the Gemara quotes Rav Papa, who says, over there, off in the west in Eretz Yisrael, they say no. V'amarta aleim doesn't count as having started. Starting means you started talking about tzitzis. If you said the words v'asu lahem tzitzis, then you have to say the whole thing. Okay, so we have a lot of different opinions here. Are you allowed to skip? Are you not allowed to skip if you said v'amarta aleim? So Abaye says, therefore, we can't skip. We have to say the whole thing. Because we have to start. We have to say v'amarta aleim, because that's the opinion we have here of Shmuel bar Yehuda. And then we have to go like Rav Kahana, and what the minig is over here, that you can't just stop once you started. So we have to start, and once we started, we have to be afraid of the other opinion, and we have to continue. So we end up having to say the whole thing. Now the Gemara asks, the Gemara says, and if you say Hashem Elokeichem, which is the end, then you have to say Emes. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. There's a mitzvah of mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim at night. If you're not going to say the parsha of tzitzis, you didn't mention Yetzias Mitzrayim. So the Gemara says, that's alright. There's a simple formula for mentioning Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we say the following thing. Hashem Elokeinu. We are very thankful to you, Hashem. You took us out of Mitzrayim. You rescued us from the house of slavery. And you did miracles with great strength for us on the sea. And we sang Shira to you. The Gemara now turns its attention to the statement of Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, the Mishnah. The Mishnah quoted Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, who says, what is the reason that the order that we say Shema is first the parsha of Shema and V'ahavta, followed by V'hoya, and then Vayomer. So Rabbi Shua had said, because the parsha of Shema helps us be Mekabel Ol Malchus Shemayim, the rulership of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only then can we be Mekabel Ol Mitzvahs, the mitzvahs that he tells us to do. And that we say before Vayomer, because Vayomer has only mitzvahs tzitzis in it, which is only during the day, but V'hoya has in it the parsha of learning Torah and other things which apply also at night. Now the Gemara says that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai has a different pshat in the order. He says that the reason for the order is as follows. So he starts off and he says the following thing. Shema has in it the mitzvah of learning Torah. It says V'dibarta bam. And V'hoya has the mitzvah of teaching Torah. It says V'limadatem oisim, go teach your kids. And Vayomer has the discussion of doing a mitzvah, tzitzis. So first you have to learn, then you can teach, and then you can do. So that's the order. So the Gemara challenges that. The Gemara says it's not true that Shema only talks about learning. Shema also talks about teaching. It says Vishinantam Levonecha. The first parsha of Shema has teaching in it. And it also has mitzvahs in it. It also has mitzvahs, things that you're supposed to do. It has tefillin, it has mezuzah. And the Gemara says, and you know what? V'hoya also has mitzvahs in it. So the whole order is not correct. So the Gemara explains, Rav Shimon meant as follows. The first parsha of Shema has all three aspects in it. V'dibarta bam, you should learn. V'shinatem levanecha, you should teach. Ukshartem muchsaftem, make tefillin mezuzah, you should do. V'hoya doesn't have anything about learning. It has v'limadatem oisam and tefillin mezuzah. It only has teaching and doing, so it's going to be second. Vayomer has even less. It doesn't have teaching, and it doesn't have learning. It only has doing, so it'll be the third one. So the Gemara asks, why didn't he just use what Rabbi Shua ben Karcha said about first you're Mekabel all Malchus Shemayim, and then all mitzvahs? The Gemara says, yeah, he was just adding. He wasn't arguing, he was just adding another factor. In connection with this discussion, the Gemara notes that Rav was once observed putting on tefillin only after he said Shema. And the Gemara wonders, but we have a brisa which explicitly says he's supposed to put on tefillin before you say Shema. So the Gemara says it's not a problem. Rav held like Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, who said first you have to be mekabel ol malchus shemayim, and then you could start doing the mitzvahs. Gemara says, what do you mean? Rabbi Shua ben Karcha was talking about the order that you read it. He wasn't saying the order that you do it. He also agrees that you have to put on tefillin before you say Shema. He was just saying what order you should say the Parshias in. And additionally, we've seen Rav many times who Reb Chia said he saw Rav, that he did the following thing. He washed his hands, he said a bracha Brachos Daf, he taught us Mishnayos, then he put on tefillin, then he said Shema. So you see the Rav himself sometimes put on tefillin before Shema. So it can't be that he holds Beshita, it's supposed to be the other order, because Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says first you have to be Mekabel all Malch Shemayim and only then you say Shema. That can't be what's going on over here. So Mer says, well, maybe I'll tell you that the reason why that time he put on tefillin before he said Shema was because it wasn't Zman Kriya Shema yet. Mer says that can't be, because then Rav Chia, who said over that this is what he saw, what's his point? It would just happen that way because it wasn't Zman Kriya Shema yet. Mer says no, he had a point. His point was that you have to say Brachos Daf before you learn Mishnayos. We had a discussion a few blot ago whether or not you have to say Brachos Daf on Mishnayos. Anyway, the Gemara says the answer is that in the case where Rav put on tefillin after he said Shema is because he had somebody bringing him his tefillin and the guy was late. So he said Shema first because he wanted to say it on time. And then he put on tefillin afterwards. Now the Gemara quotes a related statement from Ula. Ula says somebody who says Shema without tefillin on, it's like he's spoken false testimony about himself. Because in the Parsha of Tefillin, in the Parsha of Shema, it says, Ukshartam, put on tefillin, and you're not wearing them. The Gemara says, and it's like he brought a carbon oil, and he didn't bring the mincha, the accompanying flour offering. Or he brought a different carbon, which requires nesachim and pouring wine, and he didn't bring the wine. Either way, it's something very essential missing from the service that he did here.